I think we can start now. Thank you very much and welcome to this webinar. Many thanks to all of you for connecting and joining the conversation today. Special thanks also to our excellent group of speakers. And thank you to the OECD for co-organizing this discussion with us. Today we will talk about urbanization, with a special focus on what's happening across Asia. Urbanization is a global mega trend affecting the way we live, we work and interact. And over the past 40 years, global population has almost doubled. As a result, the size of cities has grown very rapidly. Today, cities are home to almost half of the global population, and this share is projected to reach 55% by 2050. And it will be interesting to see, now it's too early to tell, but it will be very interesting to see somehow how the pandemic is going to affect this trend. We also know that Asia is an important driver of urbanization globally. Asian cities are developing and transforming very fast. This is a transformation that those of us living in Asia can witness and observe by first hand. These are also topics that the OECD and also ERIA have been working extensively on. For instance, at ERIA, we are increasingly focusing on how urban development is affecting the process of ASEAN economic integration as well as sustainability in the region. This was a topic of our recent publication, ASEAN Vision 2040, for instance. And the title of our discussion today, Cities in the World, is also the title of a recently published OECD-European Commission report. And you will find the link to this report together with other relevant resources from both the OECD and ERIA in the chat box. So, Cities in the World, this report offers a new perspective on urbanization by analyzing for the first time globally the growth of cities, towns, and rural areas using a definition that was recently adopted by the United Nations Commission, the Statistical Commission of the United Nations, in last March in 2020. This is very interesting as it will allow us to gain a better understanding on urbanization across the globe with consistent and comparable metrics. It also defines metropolitan areas in terms of relationships with surrounding communities. So we will talk about this report, this definition. We will hear more about that from our keynote speaker today, Paolo Veneri, shortly. And we will also discuss quality of life in cities, links between economic development and metropolitan areas, demographic growth and decline, and how cities are both expanding and densifying, and how this affects sustainable development. I mentioned the chat box before, because please keep an eye on that because of the links that will be shared, but also use this channel to interact with us during the duration of the webinar and ask questions to the speakers, as we will get back to these questions during the Q&A later on. But now it's time to start our conversation, and I will do so by introducing our first speaker, Dr. Paolo Veneri, who is the head of the Regional Analysis and Statistics Unit at the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SME, Regions and Cities. His work covers several topics connected to urban and regional development, including understanding and measuring urbanization, well-being, and spatial inequalities. And he has led several OECD flagship publications, including Cities in the World, the one we are going to hear about today. He holds a PhD in economics, and he has published numerous papers in academic journals within the field of urban economics and regional studies. Paolo, the floor is yours. Over to you now.
Thanks, Giulia. I will try to share my screen for the presentation, but let me first say that it's a pleasure to be here today to present to you this very exciting project that the European Commission and the OECD have been undertaking since now about 2.5 years ago. Let me see. Yes. Do you see the screen correctly? I hope so. So, in a way, we believe this project provides, in many respects, a new and groundbreaking perspective on how we look at urbanization. when we started the project, actually the key question was, the key objective, let's say, of the project was that in order to provide good policy, let's say, advice for the challenges that cities are facing today, it was really needed to have an understanding of urbanization which is global and which was benefiting from a consistent definition of all the concepts that we need when we talk about urbanization, like cities, metropolitan areas, rural areas, and so on. So that's why we invested a lot on together, European Commission, OECD, and also together with other international organizations, to develop a consistent definition of what is a city, what is a metropolitan areas, rural areas, that we developed over the years, and that we finally presented at the UN Statistical Commission, which endorsed this definition for enhancing international comparisons. Here we are talking about really trying to understand urbanization, and so really enhancing it to the maximum extent possible the international comparisons of this type of issues. So just let me say, why do we need to do that? For two reasons. One is that national definitions of what is a city, what is urban, what is rural are very different across countries. We are very different until at least let's say we didn't introduce this shared definition with our UN countries. And the second point is that now many countries are making efforts to monitor SDGs. As you know, I mean, SDGs, some of the SDGs defined in the UN framework refer to urban areas or refer to rural areas specifically. Just a few examples: access to public transport or percentage of PM2.5 in the air. These indicators are very sensitive actually to how we define cities, where we draw the borders, where we draw how we define the boundaries. So since the SDG monitoring, let's say, exercise is a global one, is also important that at least from a research point of view, let's say, we provide, let's say, tools that can be useful from this international comparison approach. So that said, so one of the key contributions of the report is exactly try to understand what is urbanization and what are its features by using this harmonized definition. This slide shows let's say this visual show the three blue bars is the main let's say definition that we call the degree of urbanization. So with this report, we really try to go beyond the traditional dichotomy between urban and rural, and we use three main categories actually. We look at cities, we look at towns and semi-dense areas, and we look at rural areas. So we have three main categories, not two. And why? Because this intermediate one between the cities and the rural areas is actually one of the most interesting, because in some countries they tend to be considered something more similar to what is urban. Some other countries, I mean, they tend to consider them as more close to what is rural. And all the information that we use, I mean, to classify all the inhabited territory in one of these three categories is population on a very detailed geographical level. So what we use is a population grid, so the number of people that are living in a square kilometer in a regular space, so that we don't have issues of, let's say, various shape of the units that we should consider in each country. But we have an estimated population grid that we can apply for the entire world, so using the same thresholds and the same definition. Of course, we hope that countries will be able, all countries in the world, to have their own official grid based on the census that will be available in a few years. But so we have the main definition, as said, is the degree of urbanization. This is a map, an example for Durban in South Africa. We have the red small local units. These are what we call cities. Then we have the yellow/orange parts of the territory, which is the intermediate categories, towns and semi-dense areas. So they don't have a density of very high density, but they have kind of moderate density. And then we have the green areas. So with low density, these are the rural areas. Okay. This is the first, let's say, a main definition we use in the report, and then we have an extension that is quite useful to compare also and to look at cities from a more economic point of view. So we use the concept of functional urban areas that in, let's say, more, to use a more common term, we also call them metropolitan areas. What does it mean? That we took the cities and we took the surrounding commuting zones around cities. So the surrounding area that are functionally, economically integrated to the city. This is useful when we make comparison in terms of economic development, in terms of to really see where not just the population, but how people move over space. So with those definitions in mind, we try to answer a few simple questions in the report. For example, so what are the metropolitan areas that are growing? What are the metropolitan areas which are declining, and why? Also, another important point was to look at how the structure of the urban systems, the distribution of sides of cities of different size changes with respect to economic development. So when we look at the entire world, what do we observe in this respect? A third point, also, we were able to look at the quality of life differences between cities, towns and semi-dense areas, and rural areas. As we will see, cities provide, in some respects, a higher quality of life than other areas, but in some others, a lower quality of life. And the interesting part is that we could do that at the global level. And then also, finally, we also assessed how the shape of cities, so the internal structure of cities, the densities, or the expansion of cities changing in the world, in the different cities in the world, and because this is relevant because it can affect actually the cost of service delivery and some of the sustainable development goals that I mentioned before. So first of all, what is the overall picture? By using this, let's say, 3 categories instead of 2, we have, let's say, an overarching picture for the entire world that we found. So as Giulia mentioned at the beginning, almost half of the total world population already now lives in cities. By cities here, we refer to settlements with at least 50,000 people. So it's almost half, 48%. Most 1/4 lives in rural areas and 28% in towns and semi-dense areas. This is the picture for the world. If we look at, let's say, Asian countries, for example, that we are discussing today, the picture is not very different, actually. Asian countries compared to the world average, let's say, is slightly less urbanized, in the sense that it's slightly less high the share of people living in cities, slightly less high that living in towns. Thanks to the population projections of the European Commission, we are also able to make projections of how this share will evolve by 2050. And actually, according to those projections, we estimate that by 2050, the world population in cities will be 55%, and in ASEAN countries, that would be 51%. But this is the static picture. What we could do with the report is looking also back in time. We don't have only a static picture, but we have, let's say, a trend in the share of urbanization, the share of, let's say, population living in cities, population living in the other 2 categories. And we see that since of course, due to the demographic change and the population growth in the entire world, we have observed a growth in population in all the 3 categories, and will continue to be so in the coming 20 years. Sorry, 30 years, by 2050. So as of today, we have 3.5 billion people living in cities. We expect 40% more in 2050. This is mostly explained by total population growth. There will be an increase also in the other 2 categories, but much below the level of the growth of cities. If you look at Asian countries, we expect slightly lower, most likely significantly lower growth of population in the future in the cities, but still much faster than in the other types of settlements. So as of today, we estimate that there are almost 300 million people living in cities, and this will increase by about 30%. So to answer to the question on metropolitan areas. So we just not look only at cities, but cities and their surrounding communities. There is a clear evidence that we find on the growth of metropolitan areas. If we look at the time frame from 2000 to 2015, this is the time frame for which we have the most robust and reliable data, and it's a sufficiently long period for being, let's say, for observing kind of long-term trends. There is a clear pattern here, which is interesting, and this report shows, is that population growth was significantly higher in the entire world for the large metropolitan areas. So if we divide all the metro areas in different sizes, and if you look at the largest ones, so above 5 million people, we observe both in the world and in Asian countries that is the largest one that have the highest growth rate. And actually, the interesting thing is that for ASEAN countries, this is actually much clearer, and the difference is much clearer in the sense that the cities and their community zone with more than 5 million people actually have grown twice as high as all the other metropolitan areas of different sizes. But not all metropolitan areas have been growing. Actually, there is even 20%, 1/5 of the metropolitan areas in the entire world that have been actually declining or stagnating in terms of population. This slide shows you a map with each dot is the metropolitan areas in the entire world. We have kind of 9,000 metropolitan areas in the entire world. And if you see the orange or the red dots, those are those which are stagnating or declining, and the red and the green are those that are increasing in terms of population. So there is 20% in the world that are declining, and this share for this share for the ASEAN countries is slightly higher, but it is expected to be even higher in the future. By 2050, while we expect population growth in metro areas, this will be concentrated in fewer, because a larger share of metropolitan areas will probably be stagnating or declining according to the projection. Then on the let's say how economic development is connected to the structure of the urban systems. So what we observe here, we observe something that in a way was already showed by the literature in the field. The first point, which is if we look at different development levels, we divide countries by development level, we see that the higher the development of the country measured by income, so the higher the share of population living in metropolitan areas. But what is striking is that it's not just what makes really the difference in between let's say the level of development of the countries is the share of population living in the largest. So there's the portion of the bar which is at the top, which really is really different. So the metropolitan areas, the share of people living in large metropolitan areas is significantly much higher in high-income countries compared to lower-income countries. That's what we observe. As you can see, the pattern in ASEAN countries is similar to the high-income countries in terms of what's the actual share of the total metropolitan population which is living in large metropolitan areas. But it's not only about this total share, it's also how this can shape and can, let's say, affect regional disparities. At UCD, we have worked a lot regularly on trying to understand and measure regional disparities. So within countries' economic development disparities. The process of urbanization is from a long-term perspective connected with this concept of regional disparities. In which sense? Regions, subnational regions that host metropolitan areas, that host large metropolitan areas, tend to be richer than other regions that are without metropolitan areas. And the difference between regions in terms of economic development of regions tend to be larger, starker, let's say, in countries of middle-income countries where urbanization has started but is not yet completely mature in a way. This idea is shown in this graph, where we see this inverse U shape between the level of development of the country on the horizontal axis and the let's say the the difference, let's say, between richest and smallest. So in a way, as country develop, urbanization takes place, makes some regions, let's say, richer, and that could increase regional disparities. And as soon as, let's say, the country develops even more, then regional disparities tend to decline. So we have also, as I mentioned at the beginning, look at the differences in how people live, let's say, within cities and within the different types of areas, rural areas, towns and semi-dense areas, and so on. So a first overarching message is that overall, I mean, if we look at general indicators of quality of life, and if we consider here 111 countries, so not all countries in the world in this case, but still a large sample. Here we were able to use the Gallup World Poll global surveys, which we were able to tabulate according to the definition that we have developed. According to this survey, there is a difference between the life satisfaction, I mean, the percentage of people who says that they are satisfied with life in cities, towns and semi-dense areas, and rural areas. There is a gradient in a way. We are not talking about huge differences, but still differences that are somewhat significant. But it's not only about subjective life satisfaction. There are a number of outcomes that we can measure, and some are actually better, tend to be better in cities, some in rural areas, and so on. But if you look at still about life satisfaction, in the case of ASEAN countries, here we don't observe actually striking differences. They are pretty much at the same level. Let's say there is lower differences compared to what we observe for the entire world. Then, what explains quality of life? As I said, there are outcomes that are better in cities, outcomes that are worse in cities. Digitalization, health tend to be actually higher in cities. People say report, let's say, lower health problems in cities compared to other settlements. They report, I mean, that they are using more internet devices, using more the internet in cities compared to other areas. On the other hand, there are other outcomes that are not better, not better in cities. For example, air quality, of course, but also sense of insecurity appears to be on average higher in cities. Finally, to conclude, we also looked at with the data, let's say, in our that we use in our report, allowed us to look at individual cities and look within and look at the patterns of growth. How does it take place? How do cities actually grow? So if we decompose the growth of population of cities across the different decades that we can monitor, so from 75 to 90, from 90 to 2000, from 2000 to 2015, we see that the growth of population of cities was in the entire world mostly explained by what we can call densification. So there was an increase in density. So between 65 and 70% of the population, 71% of the population growth in cities is explained by, within the same boundaries, there have been an increase in population, so an increase in density. Another between 35 and 29% is instead explained by the physical expansion across space of cities that, of course, they expand as they grow in population, they expand across space. So according to our definition and the extent of the geographical granularity that we are using in this report, this is the figures that we found. Finally, of course, the growth of cities also, in a sense, raises important challenges for exposure to climate change risks. And we believe and we hope that having this data and this definition also can help monitoring a little bit what are the places, because as I said, here we show overarching pictures and charts, but actually the underlying data is for individual cities. So, I mean, there is a very rich information there available where we can see, for example, the share of population that lives in the different settlements and what's the level, for example, of risk of floods or sea level rise risks. So this is something that wanted to mention. Finally, to conclude, there are some implications for our future work that we hope that also through the work that was presented at the UN Statistical Commission, there will be more and more countries that will be able to implement the definition on their own and to use the degree of urbanization, perhaps not only for international comparisons, that in a sense there are important topics that I think we can help addressing with this. We started addressing, and we can definitely we still have some, let's say, very big, important open research questions that we hope to be able to contribute through this work. For example, looking at COVID and how it can affect the shape of urbanization. Was I mean, understanding a bit better and more in depth the phenomenon of shrinking cities and how to manage decline of population, which we saw that is an important phenomenon for many cities. The link with sustainable development, and then of course also the possibility to focus on cities of small, intermediate size, not just of the large metropolitan areas. I think these are all topics that we would be happy to contribute, and we hope that our concepts and data developed could help other people to work on this. With this, I think I finalize my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paolo. I think you have concluded, right? Yes. Thank you very much, and thank you also for in the final slides, if you want, you're already introducing the topic we will focus on in the panel discussion. So now it's probably time to start this panel discussion, and I'm very pleased to introduce our great panelists with us today. It's really an honor to have with us Dr. Bernadia Irawati Tjandradewi, who is the Secretary General of United Cities and Local Governments Asia Pacific, UCLG ASPAC. She's the first woman in this position, and she's been working in urban development and related fields for more than 15 years. She began her career at JICA, the Japan International Cooperation Agency, and after that she worked for CityNet in Yokohama. In 2015, she was appointed as a member of the advisory group on gender issues of UN Habitat, and she was selected as one of the prominent women whose work makes impact in Asia Pacific in 2018 by GovInsider Asia. Her interests are on strategic urban planning, climate change, disaster management, water management, women empowerment, and local governance. And Dr. Bernadia, she received a PhD in urban engineering from the University of Tokyo and 2 master's degrees in atmospheric physics from Nagoya University in Japan and in public policy from the National University of Singapore. Thank you for being with us and welcome, Dr. Bernadia. Also on the panel, it's great to have Dr. Luis Dijkstra, who's also an author of the report that Paolo just presented. He's the head of the economic analysis sector of the Director General for Regional and Urban Policy in the European Commission. He's the editor of the Cohesion Report, which analyzes economic, social, and environmental issues in EU regions and cities, and also a visiting professor at the London School of Economics. He works closely with international organizations such as the OECD, the UN, the World Bank, the European Environmental Agency, the Joint Research Center, and Eurostat. And his recent work covers topics such as global definition of cities and rural areas, the geography of EU discontent, quality of government, and gender equality. Luis holds a PhD in urban and regional planning from Rudiger University, New Jersey, and the Master in Urban and Regional Planning from the London School of Economics. Welcome and thank you, Luis. Also with us, thank you for being with us, is Ms. Benazir Syahril, Project Officer for ASEAN Connectivity at the ASEAN Secretariat. She facilitates the planning, implementation, and monitoring of projects under the Master Plan on ASEAN Connectivity in 2025, particularly in the areas of sustainable urbanization, smart cities, and digital innovation. Ms. Syahril has been deeply involved in the development and implementation of the ASEAN Sustainable Urbanization Strategy, and she's also the focal point for the ASEAN Smart City Network Secretariat. Thank you for being with us, Benazir. And also on the panel, my colleague, Dr. Venkatachalam Anbumozhi, Dr. Ambu, senior economist at ERIA, with over 20 years of experience in economic and environmental policymaking and research interest in a range of sustainability issues linked to climate change, clean energy, circular economy, and regional cooperation. Ambu has worked with the Asian Development Bank Institute, the University of Tokyo, and the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. And he was a member of the APEC expert panel on green finance, the G20 task force on low carbon infrastructure, and the ASEAN working group on climate resilient growth. And he obtained his PhD from the University of Tokyo. Thanks, Ambu, for being with us. And later, we will also hear from Dr. Rudiger Ahrend, also an author of the publication Paolo presented. He's the head of the Economic Analysis, Statistics, and Multi-Level Governance section in the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SME, Regions and Cities. He has been supervising numerous projects in a wide area of subjects: industrial transition, regional and urban innovation and development, subnational finance, spatial productivity, and metropolitan governance, for instance. He started his career at the OECD in 2002, where he worked as a senior economist in the OECD Economics Department and as the head of the urban program in the Directorate for Public Governance and Territorial Development before his present role. And in addition to his work in OECD countries, he has also worked extensively on Russia and other emerging economies. Rudiger holds a PhD in economics from the London School of Economics, as well as degrees in social sciences and mathematics from the University of Göttingen, Paris Dauphine, and Sorbonne. Thank you, Rudiger, for being with us today. So let's start immediately our panel discussion with the panelists. And I would invite Dr. Bernadia first. So the OECD-European Commission report shows that Asian cities tend to have higher densities than other regions in the world. What do you think is the best way to manage trade-offs between advantages but also costs of agglomeration and density? And what are the latest policy developments in this respect that you have been observing in Asian countries? Over to you, Dr. Bernadia, and welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for a nice introduction, and very good morning, very good afternoon. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to attend this important discussion, and congratulations to OECD for releasing the report, which we also see quite crucial to discuss how we want to see the urbanization, and also especially in this COVID-19 pandemic, and how this reshape the future of our urban development. I don't see high density as a problem, but of course, urbanization is inevitable phenomenon because we see unbalance in development in the country. And this, of course, produce several challenges, continuous disruption, because cities need to also provide basic services, and still cities are attractive, all kind of attractive place for people to move in. So cities have also built this kind of have a vulnerability, especially in also handling some of the potential or disease outbreaks, and of course have ecological decline and other crises. So we see agglomeration and density such will definitely push the city to provide efficient mobility, reliable connectivity, as well as good basic services. So in terms of gaining the benefits from agglomeration, I think, as well as reducing this vulnerability and risk, I think we see from the COVID that none of the cities is ready when the pandemic faced to us. So I think the importance of rezoning and mixed use development in the cities will be extensive discourse that see the way cities will grow and manage their resources. So those issues are also commonly intertwined in both resilience cities and as well as smart cities development framework. But what I'm looking at this as smart city is not just about it's not about technology. So this is also a kind of improvement in governance system as well. So obviously, cities need to have a capacity, to have a capability, not only to be able to bounce back better, or maybe bounce back faster and better. This is also actually a kind of called resilient cities approach, but also able to build back better, looking at this afterwards, using several kind of approaches that maybe can be seen as a smart city approaches. So adopting a resilient approach that focus on building social and ecological capital will improve definitely cities capacity and awareness regarding the resource management issues. We are starting talking about risk economy, circular economy, and also adopting smart city approaches that focus on producing effective and efficient solutions that will boost the city capacity in seeing opportunities and utilizing these rights, resources to tackle certain issues. Because we see also from this COVID, solidarity spirit has been increased in urban citizens, and also we see that kind of supporting mechanism that we can see quite obvious here. I think this is a kind of a social capital that we should also grab. So we know that Asian cities are on the forefront of effort to build resilient governance capacity. Through socially networks, multi-stakeholders partnerships, and urban as well as climate changing planning. And we see also pentahelic model in which local governments alone cannot do everything by themselves. So it requires also kind of a cooperation with community, businesses, media, as well as government itself. Yeah? So in Asia, the capacities of urban citizens to build resiliency to environmental threats and crises have also often been gained through decentralization of rights to decision making about locally important resources. So I think this is quite clear that because this is also what we are also have been promoting, and the decentralization is a key in improving the performance of the local governments in managing their cities as well. So I think this is also, I have shared earlier that the report from the World Bank shows that the extra cost to build resiliency into infrastructure system is only 3% of the overall investment needs. So yet this would bring benefits of net benefits of almost 4.2 trillion US dollar of a lifetime of the infrastructure. So the issue is that how it's not to spend more, but how to spend smartly, and also to spend wisely, and also to make sure that we put our money in the right basket and then build resiliency, because it's not just to for us to respond, but also to make sure that the kind of risk can be reduced. So there is no, of course, single policy in Asian cities that can stand out as a generic solutions, because cities, every city is unique, and we also don't want to see all cities look like New York or or look like Singapore, because we want to see in the cities have a soul. They have to have a spirit. They also have to have a culture there that embedded in the life of the people. So this is why each city has its unique strategies as well to tackle these problems. But nowadays, development policy is in Asia is not only focusing on the physical infrastructure, but also tends to focus on improving urban governance and social equality that supporting either realizing resilience or smart development. So I think this is a turning point because I think we have learned a lot from the COVID. Local revenue of local government has been decreasing quite tremendously. I think it has been lost almost 50% or more than 50% of the local revenue. So this is the turning point of decision makers actually, whether we want to go further and co-create together with our community for a better life for our society, and not going back to the time when, before the COVID-19 happened. So redesign our city to have a compact city, a resilient city, and also build back better, that will be crucial. And I think we can see quite clearly that this is a time for us to reset our targets and also looking at the future with optimistic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bernadia, for highlighting the current challenges and also this diversity that cities across the world have and that should be reflected in individual strategies. So let's continue the conversation now with Luis. So Luis has also worked, we were saying before, on the report that Paolo presented. So how do you think that this new definition of cities, metropolitan and rural areas documented in your report can help policymakers? Does the benefit go beyond the advantages of a solid international comparison? The floor is yours, Luis.
Thank you, Giulia. Excellent question. This project is indeed about making statistical comparisons easier across international borders, but I actually think it goes well beyond that. Implicit in these definitions are actually suggestions on how to find coherent areas for policy design and policy implementation. We've documented an impressive growth in the number of cities and in the size of cities. And as that process unfolds, cities often grow beyond the administrative boundaries that they used to be confined in. And actually, what this definition also implies is that if you want to create a coherent policy, you should look beyond your administrative borders and look at this coherent urban center, this dense urban part, the city, or even go beyond and include the commuting zone and look at the functional urban area or metropolitan area, in particular for policies such as land use policies, public transport policies, infrastructure policies. That's incredibly important. So I think it makes comparison easier, but it also suggests how you can design your policies. Your video is black now. Okay. I don't know how to fix that.
But we could hear you very clearly, so no problem.
I'll start it again. Maybe you can see me now. I wanted to make a second point, and hopefully the camera kicks in. One of the things that global analysis of cities has typically done is look at changes over time of certain indicators. And why have they done that? Because they were aware that the definitions were very different, right? And so they realized that if we look at the density level of a city, might be very biased because some cities are defined very widely, so others very small. And so we just look at the changes in density over time. But actually with this definition, you could look at density levels. You don't have to only look at changes over time. And what can we learn from that? Well, we find an incredible variety of densities. And typically cities in low-income countries have a density of 10,000 inhabitants per square kilometers, whereas in high-income countries, it's only like 2,000 or 3,000. So what does that teach us is that we shouldn't obsess about the small changes that we monitor over time in density, but we should look at the levels and make sure that those levels are suitable for what we are trying to provide. And if you look, for example, at the Sustainable Development Goal indicators and the New Urban Agenda, it's all about stopping cities from becoming less dense than they are. And I don't think that's the key priority. We should make sure that they have a sufficient density level, but not necessarily, they don't indefinitely have to become denser, right? That's not the goal. Another thing that we've done with this work is, so we've detected built up areas. This includes buildings and infrastructure, road, rail, transport infrastructure, etc. And that allows us to come up with a rough guess about which cities have sufficient capital stock, have enough buildings, enough transport infrastructure, which ones don't have enough, and which ones may have an excess, too much dispersed buildings and infrastructure. And we can also see how that changes over time. And this allows us to identify cities that are underinvested and becoming worse. So cities that don't have enough capital stock and where population growth is outpacing the capacity of the city to provide more housing, to provide more roads, to provide more public transport. And I think that's a very critical issue. And because we can now compare, we can see, okay, which cities are catching up with their population growth, which ones are providing enough, which ones should actually densify. So it's a much more nuanced point of view. The last thing I'd say is that we've also been able to investigate density and public transport. And one of the examples for me that kind of highlighted that this definition is useful is we've looked at every single metro system in the entire world, and every single metro station is inside our definition of a city. So it captures every single metro station. What does this suggest? It suggests that metro systems are uniquely designed for these dense parts of the city. And so now you can compare, do I have, how extensive is my metro system? To be able to answer that question, you need a border around your city, and we provide a harmonized way of drawing that border. Now, I know that in Asia, many countries are building a large number of metro systems, and this is a way of understanding which city could still benefit from them, which neighborhoods are missing from the system, and what to prioritize in terms of funding. So this was the logic behind it, right? How can we understand the need for further investments, and how can we identify the cities and the neighborhoods that really need them? And the last thing I'll say about that is that we try to find out at metropolitan scale, what kind of neighborhood density do you need to provide efficient public transport? A network that's not too long, where you can provide high speeds, high frequency, and an attractive system. And it turns out that as long as you have a density of at least 5,000 inhabitants in your neighborhood, you can really make sure that your network isn't too expensive, isn't too diluted, isn't too long. However, if you fall below that density, then costs skyrocket very rapidly, because it means that you have a very dispersed metropolitan population, distances become longer, the number of people using a particular line drop, so it's much less, it's harder to fund a high frequency service, and actually it all kind of starts to fall apart. So the suggestion from this research that we did is that you need to maintain a certain basic level of density at your neighborhoods in your metropolitan area. If you can maintain those above 5,000, you're fine. Increasing it to 10 or 15,000 is not radically going to alter the economics there. But if it drops below 5,000 to 3 or 2, then really you see costs explode. So this really shows that cities have a wide variety of options to pick in terms of density and layouts, as long as they maintain a certain basic neighborhood density to ensure that they can provide efficient public transport. So I think those are a couple of the points that this report brings forward. And I love the fact that we've provided all this information online. You can check the density of your city and how it has changed over the last 40 years. So I invite you all to explore all the data that's out there, and I hope you learn something from it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louis. Now let's get back to Asia with Benazir. So ASEAN has developed the ASEAN Smart City Network. Can you please describe this initiative to us? What cities are part of the network? What issues is the network working on? Benazir, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Giulia. I just want to check if you could hear me well. Awesome. All right. I'd like to joining the other panelists in congratulating OECD for the report. What a great afternoon, great Friday afternoon to talk about city in particular. And thank you for inviting me to share with you the work that ASEAN has been doing related to smart cities and sustainable urbanization. In 2018, the ASEAN leaders established ASEAN Smart City Network, or ASEAN, we call it. The ASEAN has 26 cities, which also includes capitals from all ASEAN member states. The ASEAN serve as a collaborative platform to support the development of people-oriented, people-centered smart cities in the region using technology as an enabler. And the ASEAN aims to facilitate cooperation on smart city development. And this is achieved through sharing best practices, developing action plans, catalyzing viable projects with the support of private sector and solution providers. And it also seeks to encourage support and funding from ASEAN external partners and multilateral organizations. In this year in particular, the ASEAN has focused on strengthening its institutional mechanisms to assist the network in monitoring progress of its smart city action plans, facilitating partnerships, as well as preparing the network for future membership expansion. So far, around 50 projects have been developed under the network. And I would say around 30% of the projects are related to transport and mobility. And projects on waste management, water management system rank second. And then the other projects are spread across various sectors, such as tourism, public safety, education, healthcare. And there are also projects that look into developing an integrated database system to support city authorities in decision making. Now, if I may, Giulia, I would like to switch gear a little bit to share with you the work that ASEAN has also been doing on sustainable urbanization. So in 2018, ASEAN Sustainable Urbanization Strategy, or we call it ASUS, was developed and launched. So the idea of ASUS is to support cities across ASEAN in strategic planning towards achieving sustainable urbanization while giving due consideration to their unique context. The ASUS prioritizes several areas and actions for cities to focus on. And then it also provides a set of toolkits to support cities in prioritizing their sustainable urbanization areas and actions, and also to support them in developing practical actions relevant to their context. Under this initiative, under ASUS, ASEAN has partnered with the UN Habitat to support several cities across ASEAN in developing their planning their sustainable urbanization actions, and also developing technical project proposals and engaging external partners. And in implementing ASUS, we work closely with the various city networks in ASEAN, including the ASEAN Smart Cities Network, which I have shared with you earlier. And through synergizing the efforts of the ASEAN Smart City Networks as well as the ASEAN Sustainable Urbanization Strategy, ASEAN seeks to continue supporting cities in addressing urban challenges, including challenges brought by the COVID-19 pandemic, and also strengthening pandemic preparedness for long-term urban resilience. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you very much, Benazir. Extremely interesting. Now let's conclude this first round with Ambu, Dr. Ambu, my colleague from ERIA, and let's talk a bit about the green transition. So we know that a transition towards greener cities across Asia is imperative. You are working with a number of cities across ASEAN, but also India and beyond to support this transformation. What interesting trends and initiatives can you share with us? What data at the city level could help the most in informing policymakers towards this effective green transition? Ambu, the floor is yours. Please unmute yourself. You're on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Giulia. And I think you rightly pointed out this is the transition, the green transition is imperative. It is no more the choice. I think this has been supported or substantiated by the Paolo's presentation or this report, and I congratulate OECD to come out with this report. As they mentioned, and in 2030, and ASEAN, particularly this region, this ASEAN plus 6 countries, we have more than 60% people will be living in urban centers, the mega cities or the second-tier cities. But the other dimension of this process is nearly 70% of the GDP will be coming from, generated from the cities. And another fact is nearly 2/10 of this population will be living as a low-income households. So this is the kind of narrative that is we give it for going for green. And we know that is the cities are also kind of a hospital for the chronic diseases. We do have this air pollution. Nearly 20 out of these mega cities in this region are not livable. Second thing is the emission is growing up. And third one is the traffic congestion. And these things are very visible. And so this gives a kind of new narrative and the challenges that is the cities facing it. And when we think about these countries and the cities know about these issues, that's why we see kind of 3 type of trends that is evolving in this region. One is the convergence. And in the 1990s, if you see, there is a movement for the green or livable cities. That is a region-wide movement. Many cities have been subscribed into this movement. And the second, in the 2000, we came up with these low carbon cities where there's more emission reductions are coming in. And the third, the movement is the very recent one is, as Benazir mentioned, the smart city network. Here we find the convergence. All these convergence are happening to bring more greenness or more sustainability and as well as the social cohesion. The second trend that we could see is the that is related to sustainability or the green is this is inequality. That is the within the cities. It is also pointed out Paolo's report, and here we find I think this urbanization and this city movements created opportunities that has contributed for poverty alleviation, but at the same time this also increased this inequality that also contributed for the sustainability changes. So this is the second challenge, that is how to attain the sustainability with the social inclusion. That is the challenge. And the third trend that is we see is, as we have been seeing happening in this COVID, and this shocks, most of the, whether it is an economic shocks or it is the climate related shocks or these pandemic shocks are happening at the city. Cities has become a kind of epicenter. So these cities has to become more resilient to absorb the shocks. So here, this is a challenge that is really more. Some of the cities has been advancing their resilient capacity and they have been improved it, but more to be done. And these are the three trends and has been emerging out, and the cities and the city mayors are responding to it. But one point that is I would like to emphasize, most of the national actions on the sustainability or the transition to green will win or will be lost in the cities. If the cities fail to act on it, then most of our battle will be lost. Coming to the second part of your inquiry, that is the data and how data can help and what type of data that is we needed. If you look into this region, particularly the emerging and the developing countries in this region, and we do find an information asymmetry. We know there are hotspots for the pollution. We know where are the high carbon emissions are coming from, which buildings are coming in. We know that is where the traffic congestion takes place. So this all we know, but this data, this information is held by either it's the policymakers, and these policymakers could be in the city level, or it could be in the national boundaries, national regulatory setups. So this information is not shared. And basically, we find an information asymmetry, and the information asymmetry between the government, city government or the national government, and the private sector, who is able to offer the solutions. And also this information asymmetry exists between the government and the public. Basically, the governance, the participatory governance is still emerging, but more to be done. And this information asymmetry has to be narrowed down. And here we find the opportunities. And you mentioned about what type of data is needed. Here, not only the type of data, but also we need integration of the data. The cities are not a kind of monolithic institution. It has the departments and it has the silo mentalities. Here, the data that has been collected at the local level, at the city level, has to be integrated, and then it has to be analyzed. More intelligence is needed to analyze this kind of data. And here we found the smart city initiatives offer kind of an opportunity where this data acquisition and then data integration and the data analysis could take place. And here we also need to differentiate the long-term data that is needed for the effective policy making, as well as how to handle the data that it has a short life, but it is very important making that instantaneous discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambu. Very relevant remarks. Now, in the interest of time, let's immediately start the second round of questions with panelists. And let's start this round with the European Commission. So what should policymakers do to build more sustainable and resilient cities? Many other panelists have touched upon it, but we want to hear also your point of view. For example, should sprawl be the main concern driving urban policies? What is the link between density and public transport? And you have already partly replied to that, but maybe we want to hear more. Luis, the floor is yours, and I hope we can see you this time.
Does the camera work right now? It works at my end. No, I'll stop it and maybe I'll start it again. Who knows, it might work. Well, I wanted to pick up on that. I actually think urban sprawl is a bit of an obsession in the urban planning discipline, and I am an urban planner, so I'm familiar with that obsession. We calculated that almost half the population of the globe lives on less than 0.5% of the total land in the globe, right? So if you look at that, that's an incredible concentration of population on such a small bit of land. So I don't think cities are the enemy or a real threat to our capacity to live on this planet in a sustainable way. I think the key to making cities sustainable is to make them more attractive. And one of the things that we need to do to make them more attractive is to make them greener And I think this pandemic has highlighted two aspects incredibly clearly: the value of public spaces and public green spaces in cities so that you can go out and exercise and get some fresh air and clean air. And the other thing is active modes of transport. Being able to walk or cycle somewhere is now really appreciated, as people are a little bit wary of taking public transport, and people try and provide for those modes more. But to do that, you occasionally need to expand a bit, right? You need to allow for more space for public transport, for green space, and for active modes of transport. So I think if I look at some of the most attractive cities in the world that combine sustainability with a very high quality of life, it's not necessarily the densest places, right? It's the places that have enough density to support activity and proximity to services and public transport, but they do so in a way that combines it with attractive open spaces and not too much traffic and not too much air pollution. And that's really the key thing, I think, for public transport. You need enough density, you need density around the public transport stations, you need to allow for people to use bicycles and all the shared mobilities that we're seeing, the scooters, the e-bikes, to allow them to reach those stations and then take public transport from there on. So I really think the way we think about urban sprawl is almost an obstacle to finding the solutions, right? We need to look at who can walk to a public transport stop. So in the report, we actually did an analysis of that because it's also a sustainable development goal indicator. And we found in many cities, 90% of the people can walk to a public transport stop quickly. So that's reassuring, right? That's good. But then we asked the second question, well, how long do they have to wait when they get there? When's the next bus? And so it turns out that in some cities, you walk to a public transport stop and there's, a bus or a tram or a metro every 5 minutes. So that's really great. But if you show up and it's like, okay, there's a bus in an hour, well, that's not great. So I think the frequency of public transport is key. And the key to being able to provide frequent public transport is to make sure that there's enough demand for it. And this is where that neighborhood density comes in, right? That 5,000 I mentioned earlier, it's really key to make sure that's high enough, because then people don't need to drive to get to the metro or the tram or the bus, they can walk. And I think that's essential. And if you have mixed functions around those transport stops, they become more attractive. I do think it's much easier to maintain density and diversify activities if you have it than trying to have to reintroduce it at the end. So I think it's more challenging for places like Houston or Atlanta in the US to densify up than it is for places like Jakarta or Manila to maintain density, or Tokyo or Singapore. They already have incredibly high densities. The challenge now is not to increase it further, but to increase the quality of life in these places, and access to public transport, access to green air quality, and easy, good infrastructure for walking and cycling is really key for those things to work. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Luis. Now, let's continue with Dr. Bernadia, UCLG Asia Pacific. So what do you think are the most important priorities for Asian policymakers to make sustainable and resilient cities? How can cities contribute to achieve sustainable development goals? Over to you, Dr. Bernadia.
Thank you very much. I think the key roles here to build cities that are more resilient and more sustainable, I think we really need excellent and strong leaderships, committed leaderships. Not only talking about local leaders, mayors, governors, but also it requires a strong commitment from the top of the country. I'm so happy that President Xi Jinping mentioned carbon neutrality of China by 2060, as well as Japan Prime Minister was saying about achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. You see, so this kind of combination of leaderships play very, very important role if we want to really build strong and resilient cities, because many local governments require a good enabling environments, looking at the regulation, looking at also the capacity development, and looking at also policies that are available in the country. So and another important aspect is, of course, require good financial schemes, because local governments have limitation. In some countries, they cannot even raise bonds, they cannot even have a borrowing, they have limitation in PPP, public-private partnerships. This kind of thing also hinder local governments to find different kind of financial options. So there are already good examples how we see a good symbiosis or good partnerships between private and local governments. Like, for example, in the solar panel in Hamamatsu, this is one of the biggest solar panels that established in cooperation with companies and local governments. So these kind of things we want to see more and more in terms of creativities, as well as having channels for different kind of financial schemes. So what we are not asking is money from central governments, but what we want is authority. We want to get mandates from central governments in order to be able to raise a different kind of financial mechanism, including taxation. So these kind of things are very crucial for us. And then in SDGs, and SDGs and 2030 agenda, we have been it had been widely embraced in the Asia-Pacific regions, and more local governments, more and more local governments are committed and also have been integrated these sustainable development goals in their local actions. And lucky enough, some countries also have been providing this kind of supporting mechanism in integrating the sustainable development goals in the local actions, and in some countries put as mandatory. So another aspect also, several cities would like to have a kind of set of monitoring framework by creating what they call it voluntary local review. And Asian cities are now the highest number of producers of VLR, voluntary local reviews. You can see several cities in Japan and Taipei and everywhere. Even now we are going to start to have one for Indonesian city, which is Surabaya. So this is also a kind of a new structured dialogues of cities, of engaging different kind of stakeholders in making sure that SDGs have some progress, and it's not only in responsibility of local government itself, but require collaboration with several others. So what also we are working on is what we call it VSR, voluntarily subnational reviews, in which we go beyond one individual city or one individual local government by mobilizing local governments in having their perspective as well in this sustainable development goals. And we don't want to see VSR as a shadow report of VNR, voluntary national review. If you are following these development goals, I think you are aware of it. So what we are trying is to provide a supporting mechanism in which the perspectives of local governments can be also included in the VNR. Because when we're looking at the number of VNR submitted to United Nations, less than 50% of VNRs have included local governments in the processes of VNR development. So this is also our advocacy. And maybe a last thing here, what we need several aspects to support and encourage local governments. I think this is, again, I want to repeat, this is a turning point. This is a critical time, how we want to redesign. I agree with the previous speaker, the importance of having good public transportation, and then also we see some shift because in Jakarta, for example, public transport passengers have decreased quite dramatically because, you know, they are still scared of this COVID transfers or spread of COVID-19. So what we need to do now is to reset to reset the targets of SDGs, because when you're looking at the 169 target, and put this in the medium, maybe short terms and medium and long term, especially when there is no financial enough available. So this already we have implemented in Indonesia, in which cities now are looking at this different kind of focused targets. And so establishing a knowledge hub and coordination platform and sharing best practices and having learning, and then through this platform, webinars and everything, I think this is a good chance for further improvement of capacity of local governments, because in the end of the day, what we need is that we would like to see our cities are attractive, our city are livable, our city are the most comfortable places to live. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bernadia. Now let's continue with Dr. Ambu, ERIA. So the business sector, also thanks to digitalization, the fourth industrial revolution, has certainly a role to play to make cities smarter and also greener. How can private companies and city and local government can work together for a better urban future, especially in the post-pandemic phase, as we are hearing from many of the panelists? Over to you.
Thank you, Giulia. Here we need to see that is city and the private sector. And here we need to see cities is always organic. You know, that is the DNA of that organics comes from the private sector. And if you see and how the private sector views cities, and that is a kind of look we need to have. Basically, private sector sees cities as a kind of incubation centers for testing their ideas or testing their markets to find the market niche that could be upscaled at the economy wide or at the sector level. So this is a kind of comparative advantage of the cities, where cities offer a kind of connected platform for the business private sector, and as well as the central government and also the community. Here we can see it that is happening during this pandemic period also. And take the case of Jakarta and here where we live, and here since the March 2020 when it was went on the lockdown, and the city has completely changed its way of life, and most people are working from the home, and most people are buying from the online, and this is online education is the common, and so it provided an opportunities for the new type of business models comes in, where we see it is a kind of during what we observed is a kind of extended enterprise model. That means there is a big company, they collaborate with these small and medium enterprises or the local companies, and they captured and they offered a better and timely services to tackle this COVID. I think this we can see this revolution basically usually takes about 3 to 4 years. Now it has brought all happen within the kind of 6 to 7 months. So where here you can show that is all these services, all these technologies are provided by the private sector. I think there is no role, there is a limited role for the governments and the others. This shows the strength as well as the partnership that is we needed for the cities for the changing conditions. But if you look into this industrial revolution, the fourth industrial revolution you mentioned, and it has already begun, but it will be more about not basically accelerating technology, but it changed the exponential growth of these technologies. That is possible, that is made possible. But again, this new paradigm, this is, we know the cities are not sustainable, the cities are risk, and the cities are not inclusive. But this kind of new public-private partnership based on the digital platform provide an opportunities. But it also comes with the challenges. And I could see there is 3 challenges or the opportunities whichever you can coin in. But the first thing is when we go for the digital cities or the smart cities, we need to think about the data privacy. That is now under this fourth industrial revolution or the digital economy, this data privacy are this the separator between the public and privacy is blurred. So here we need to find more, see that is how we can see there is a privacy data is not lost. For example, if we are thinking about a smart grid, and which is a kind of introducing this community-owned electricity generation to these better services for the city level, that needs the data. That is where there is a public and private data. And the second thing is the finance. And here also we find this digital inclusion has provided a lot of opportunities for the crowd. This is happening in the Lawa PDR, in the Luang Prabang, where the community has been invested and their reflections are there more financial literacies than where the transactions are taken up digitally. So it provided this kind of digital inclusion. And the third one is this governance point of view. And here, basically, new type of governance or the democracy that is happening, as in the case of Jakarta, where is a smart collaboration, where these consumers and the suppliers and the providers, they could be able to make a kind of real-time connection. And this is made possible, and it also created a kind of a new opportunities where this government, local government has been not prepared for it. But this kind of collaborations are made possible, and in the post-COVID area, and this kind of new initiatives and the new innovations will find a mainstream, and we need to prepare for it, and the cities need to prepare for these three challenges I mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambu. Now let's continue this conversation about digital technologies with Benazir. Across ASEAN, the acceleration towards digital economies is happening very, very fast. And as other speakers have mentioned, this, as Ambu just mentioned, this has been accelerated by the pandemic. In terms of connectivity and digitalization, what trends have you been observing across ASEAN cities? And do you think the urban-rural divide will increase or decline with this increased importance of digitalization? Over to you, Benazir.
Thanks, Giulia. I would like to divide your question into three parts. So I'm talking about the trends in adoption of digital technologies by the cities, and then the trends on connectivity, and last is digital divide between urban and rural areas. I think local governments in ASEAN are increasingly leveraging technologies as cities get larger and become more populated. It is no longer feasible to do the manual delivery or manual monitoring of public services. And the government started to recognize the role or the importance of integrating information and communication technologies to meet the needs of their urban residents. Just to mention a couple of examples on the technological innovations that ASEAN cities have adopted. In Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, they are working with Alibaba in piloting the City Brain project. So City Brain is a cloud-based traffic management system where they uses the data from ride-hailing company and also information from traffic information and then traffic camera feeds, and use that to do a live prediction of traffic, and also to optimize traffic flow, as well as to detect accidents. And going to the Philippines, in Cebu City, quite similar, but it's more of using the big data, is that they have this open source data platform that uses GPS data from taxi and ride-hailing company to analyze and reduce congestion. And if you also look at Singapore with its Smart Nation initiative, it has implemented electronic payments and also national digital identity, where it allows its residents and businesses to transact digitally with government and private sector in a convenient and secure manner. And also, I think in the face of pandemics, more cities are increasingly adopting digital technology to support contact tracing efforts to curb the spread of the virus while keeping people connected and keeping businesses going. In Makassar, Indonesia, for instance, or Manila in the Philippines, they highly encourage the citizen to do their local tax digitally, and also process business permits digitally. And on the connectivity, given the focus on restrictions of mobility, it could seem that the COVID-19 pandemic creates a significant challenge to connectivity. However, in a closer review that ASEAN has recently conducted, shows that actually connectivity could have increasing relevance as a result of the pandemic. This is because of connectivity being seen as crucial for the economic recovery from COVID-19, as well as strengthening the resilience of ASEAN member states, and in this case, their cities, to deal with future pandemics. And I think that the development of smart cities and sustainable urbanization is particularly critical to connectivity. And your last question about whether acceleration of digital technology in the face of pandemic making a digital divide between urban rural area more increasing. My take on that, Giulia, I think through strong urban-rural linkages, urban economic activities can have positive spillovers across the urban-rural continuum, such as diffusion of technologies, diffusion of innovation from urban areas to their surrounding regions. And in order to foster better urban-rural connectivity, it is important to support the growth of intermediate cities. Would be important, as what Paolo and Luis also mentioned, that this is intermediate cities, small, medium-sized cities. This is where the growth is happening. So I think more focus needs to be directed towards this city as opposed to the big mega city as what the excitement has been put into. So more attention needs to be directed towards intermediate cities to reach their potential, address their current challenges, and prepare them for future challenges. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Benazir. I think both you and Ambu have already starting replying to a question that we got in the chat box from our friend John Lee, who is always very, very active, and I thank him from that. So now we'll just give very quickly the floor to both Dr. Bernadia and Luis to address it before then passing the floor to Rudiger for final remarks. So this question is again about smart cities, the fourth industrial revolution, digital technology. This infrastructure to deploy this technology is costly. So he's asking, given the low market affordability of the region, how can local and central governments and ASEAN authority manage and deploy this solution? Dr. Bernadia, any thoughts on this? Over to you. I think she may not be with us, but anyway, then let's get the perspective from Luis regarding what's happening in Europe. Luis?
Yeah, sure. Smart cities are popular, are something a lot of countries and cities are thinking about, but I'm not convinced that this should be our top priority. I mean, for certain aspects, I think it's very useful. Digital access to public services, those things I think are really important and can make a big difference. To really try and install, measurement devices all across your city, I actually think, you need a lot of investments before that starts to pay off. I think there are a lot of basic things you can do first that you should prioritize. When it comes to transport, yes, you can monitor traffic, but if you don't have the tools to influence them, what are you going to do with that information, right? So I think actually having policies that limit the inflow of cars, that, if you want to do congestion charging, that's a lot more important than a smart city more generally. So I think there are basic things you can do. If you can't introduce congestion charging, charge for parking. Make it most expensive in the city center and less expensive out. Create places where people can transfer to the metro or the railway lines. Amsterdam, for example, has a very simple parking cost structure. It's just like a darts board. In the center, it's incredibly expensive. The further out you move, the cheaper it becomes. So that's a very simple way. You don't need fancy technology like, a congestion charge like in London or Stockholm. So my main conclusion would be that smart cities is something that's heavily pushed by the companies that hope to sell you a lot of these monitors and sensors and systems. Be cautious, think about, okay, if I have this information, what will it change? Can I use this information, or could I use that funding in a different way or in a better way? I think the idea that smart cities will solve all our problems is a bit optimistic. It won't change the fact that you need to make tough decisions and that not all of them will be popular. But, I think you need to check, first, what are our basic priorities? How do we can get there? And only then think, okay, if we know where we want to go, how can more data help us? And is it cost effective to pay for it?
Thank you, Luis. We are running out of time, so I would immediately give the floor to Rudiger for some concluding remarks.
Thanks a lot, Giulia. I would start by thanking the speaker and the panelists. I think there has been a really excellent discussion, really interesting, and it's very easy to kind of make some concluding remarks given the quality of the interventions. Basically, I think the main takeaway from today's seminar is that this new harmonized definition is a real breakthrough, and it can really bring major benefits whenever international comparisons are useful. And I'll explain you basically. I mean, international comparisons are almost always very useful. So the first area where international comparisons are important and where this new definition really can be a milestone is when it comes to investment in cities, as was mentioned both by Dr. Bernadia and by Luis. When we talk about resilience, building back better, and all these topics, basically, I mean, having comparable and solid information on densities, on where you are with infrastructure, and how your transport system compares to other places is just invaluable, because that really allows you to invest in a way that makes sense, and that kind of like you prioritize both within the city what you want to really do, and also within the countries where other places where the investment is most needed. So that's the first point. And the second point is, and Dr. Anbu has been raising this, is basically the environmental sustainability and the social inclusion. So when you're looking at kind of like administrative borders of cities and trying to achieve environmental sustainability with that, or trying to achieve social inclusion with that, I mean, that's bound to fail. I mean, what does it mean that your city is environmentally sustainable if basically all the other, suburbs around are not? Or what does it mean that your city is kind of like socially inclusive when everybody else around is kind of like, not included, and it's kind of like in a very dire social position? So it's really important to kind of like, not using administrative definitions, but using something like in the global definition, which is based on a real urban morphology, on real density criteria. And the third point I wanted to make is on the issue of sustainable urbanization, on the system of cities in a way. It's really important that in the process of urbanization, you manage the urbanization process well. And that you can obviously only do when you have an idea what's going on in your country and how your country is compared to other countries. I mean, as Mrs. Benazir Syahril mentioned, I mean, there is a lot of potential in the ASEAN countries for pushing mid-sized cities and also towns, and that we know because we can look at the statistics and see that indeed, I mean, in other parts of the world, I mean, there's a much larger portion of the population living in those cities and towns. I mean, if you're looking at sub-Saharan Africa, in the poor countries, and if you want to push in small towns and cities, and I mean, you're seeing that there's already a much larger percentage living in those places than in other parts of the world. I mean, you know that what you're trying to do is probably bound to fail. So it's incredibly important to understand both where you are with respect to the situation in other countries, but also where you are in the process in your countries and what the developments are. And for the developments, it's really important that you have solid data for the past, I mean, which you have in this report. Because, and I can really tell you that from the OECD countries, I mean, whenever you're trying to making up, I mean, projections of population bottom up, it's a disaster because basically every place is coming up with very, optimistic projections. And when you add them up, you're typically getting population numbers, total population, that are totally unrealistic. So basically your projections you're basing from a bottom up perspective, they're utterly useless. So having something on the data here, we have real historical data, we can make trends for the projections. I think that's really very important to be able to manage your urbanization process, I mean, in a good way. So basically, I mean, just to kind of sum that up, I think this new harmonized definition is incredibly useful. It is really important also that it's being used. I mean, that means basically using what we have provided, but also to some degree then also calculating new data, I mean, based on the definitions, on the delineations that are provided with this new definition. And that can make both cities and also the urbanization process much better managed and can I mean, help with well-being and also investing better. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rudiger, for summing it up very effectively and in a concise manner. I think we are already 7 minutes behind schedule, so it's time to close the meeting. In Asia, it's already late afternoon, so I'm sure people want to disconnect from their computer, rightly so. Let me thank once again the OECD for organizing with us this dialogue, all speakers and panelists for their excellent remarks today. Dr. Bernadia, who had to leave because we were running late, Ms. Benazir, Louis, Dr. Ambu, and of course, Paolo for his introductory presentation. So I think that we can continue thanking all of you and participants for being with us until the very end, and we can now close the meeting. Thank you and bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Thanks, Giulia. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for excellent sharing. Bye.